We're documenting extreme neglect and abuse inside of a youth prison in New York. Put it up, Jordan, full mass. This is so sad. A years-long staffing crisis at a youth prison in New York has led to human rights violations. We're talking about children. Human rights violations, as whistleblowers claim. Children are reported to have been locked in solitary confinement for up to 24 hours, not because of discipline, not because of some punishment, which would already be extreme for a child. It is because they don't have staff. They don't have staff, so they put them in solitary confinement, something that has made adult men and adult women completely lose their mind inside of prison systems all across this country. So that is their remedy. Put the picture back up again. Look at that. Industry Residential Center employee provided it. Industry Residential Center contains 2 of New York's 11 state-run youth prisons. Office of Children and Family Services facilities hold nearly 600 adolescents, ages 12 to 21, who are convicted of crimes in family or youth criminal court. Nearly 2/3 of the residents are Black. Boys incarcerated have been locked in cells, sometimes for upwards of 23 hours a day, for days or weeks on end, according to a lawsuit filed last month against the state agency that runs the facility. Most of the cells lack bathrooms, leaving the youth to urinate into bottles when they cannot hold it. And some lack air conditioning. Staff said kids in one building spend summer days sleeping on the floor without clothes. It's the only way to keep their bodies cool. Put up the picture again. The richest nation on the planet. State regulations. Under state regulations, boys incarcerated at a 130 bed complex are supposed to spend their days in class, participate in vocational programs, and socialize with peers in their housing unit. This is per state regulation, which means a violation of this state regulation is a violation of administrative law. That's what that means. I don't understand a state that would have these conditions. We have our own issues in Georgia. I work with the Department of Juvenile Justice for the state here through their education department. And I remember when I was a youth, I was in that same juvenile detention system. And we had our issues, but nothing like this. Nothing like this. The issues dealt with staffing who decided not to care about youth more so than the conditions of simple things like having a toilet. We always had a toilet. We had a place to shower. We had food. We had breakfast. Wasn't a great one, but we had it. But we had staff. People didn't go in solitary confinement because nobody was available to supervise. The treatment of the youth in these prisons leads to severe understaffing. So the workers described, according to the workers, they described a grave staffing shortage in the state's youth prisons that has hindered operations since at least 2022. The documents they shared show widespread understaffing with industries, 2 facilities among the hardest hit, especially when it comes to low-level staffers responsible for supervising incarcerated youth. I have a novel idea. Stop locking up so many of them. In Georgia, they were coming to this same crisis point. Lawmakers, under a Democratic governor, lawmakers got together and changed some of the rules. For example, you don't go to juvenile just because your parents want you to go to juvenile. That used to be a thing in Georgia. Another rule, If you are incarcerated, it has to be for a specific felony. That is a felony, typically one where the public would be in danger. So only the most dangerous felonies were even considered for incarceration. These were rules that had to change in the state of Georgia because Georgia was facing a similar crisis. There's more. One Rochester area facility has been operating with a tenth of its staff required for the job. When there aren't enough support staff, according to them, those on duty are left with a few options other than locking kids in cells. Meanwhile, staff rush from one area to another to address emergencies. Workers have been injured confronting frustrated detainees. Some staff have been forced to work shifts that last 24 hours or longer, then report back the next Friday. And I want to make sure I'm very clear, or the next day. I want to make sure I'm clear. This is not about the people who are working at the facilities. They are obviously overworked. They are stretched thin. This is about a policy that has to be fixed in order for the youth to benefit properly. If you can't supervise them, guess what else you won't do? You won't educate them. They don't get to go to high school. They should be in a high school class. They don't get to learn a skill. They're not engaged in meaningful recreation, social learning for development. None of that is happening. Quote, why are we here? We are part of the problem, a staffer said, breaking into tears. Quote, I'm a human rights violator, said another. You're not. You're not a human rights violator. The politicians that created the policies are. You're there as an ambassador doing the absolute best you can. And the fact that you will break down in tears during an interview, the fact that you will call yourself that says how noble you actually are. Because your calculation is based on the treatment of the child. Your calculation is based on something noble. Experienced workers who have a good rapport with the youth sometimes let them out of their rooms when they're out of ratio, risking getting written up by their own managers. So kids can at least socialize or at least use the phone. Quote, I would rather take the risk of getting paperwork, that means getting written up, than leaving kids in a room 24 or 48 or 72 hours, said a youth support coordinator at Industry. Other times, understaffing leads to extended lock-ins, during which the kids are secluded with no way to call home or to interact with staff or interact with peers. Quote, it's essentially solitary confinement, the worker said. There's often no school during lock-ins, though education staff will sometimes give kids worksheets in lieu of classroom time. Staff said, they're depriving these kids of an education. Another worker said of OCFS. OCFS, they responded. Now remember, we're dealing with bureaucracy, we're dealing with politics, we're dealing with policy, and we got a report directly from the feet on the ground. The people who are the workers on behalf of us, the community, the taxpayer, the people, okay? They've told you what it is. The people who aren't there, the people who do not directly service the children, the individuals who are not in those facilities, they got a statement to make. Excuse me. In a response, detailed statement. OCFS denies these reports. In response to a detailed list of questions, the State Office of Children and Family Services, which runs the youth prison, said in a statement that it has, quote, clear protocols that are designed to ensure the safety of youth and staff while incorporating trauma-informed and mental health responsive practices, end quote. They're at the state office. Yeah. Last month's lawsuit. filed by the Legal Aid Society and the firm Jenner and Block, argued that dysfunction in the facilities is harming the young people in custody. A 16-year-old at industry's highest security facility was locked in his cell between 22 and 24 hours a day for a month last spring. Then for another month, starting in August, the lawsuit alleged. The isolation caused him to deteriorate mentally. He's suppressed. He acts out to mitigate the loneliness, according to the suit. A state comptroller reported a report found that documented incidents of self-harm that included, quote, an expression or gesture of suicide on OCFS secure facilities rose 667% between 2019 and the end of 2022. There's real cause and effect. There's real cause and effect. All right, Jackson, thoughts here.
Stuff like this just makes more criminals. It just makes more traumatized and broken people who are likely to be repeat offenders. I mean, that's an issue with the adult prison system.
Yep.
When you're talking about juvenile facilities, these kids haven't even had the opportunity for their brains to fully develop. And what they really need is just a change of direction. A lot of the time you see kids in these situations, it's just because they're misled. They may be very angry, depressed because of their life circumstances, and they don't have proper guidance to go along to help and put them on a better path. And that's what juvenile detention centers should be about, if anything else. At least with the adults, we have all types of issues with our prison industrial complex and who we lock up and how long we lock them up for and what communities we target. But at the end of the day, at least we're talking about adults mostly who had their opportunity. These are children at the end of the day. I'm 34. And I realized that in my 20s, I was still a kid. These are children, and it's just completely unacceptable. And at the end of the day, it's a burden on the taxpayer because we're going to have more people in prison because of stuff like this. So it's just inefficient through and through.
Yeah. And the great loss of a young person because you did not properly intervene when there was an opportunity to intervene. All of these young people that we're talking about, some would moralize against them because they're incarcerated due to an alleged crime. I want to remind everyone that I too was accused of a crime. And I was in foster care. I had nobody who really cared outside of that context. I was 17 years old, state of Georgia. And at 17 years old, I'm in the back of this police car thinking I'm headed to juvenile detention. But see, the state had passed a law that made every 17-year-old in Georgia an adult. That law was not known among us at that time. It just happened. So I had to go to real jail. And because the district attorney named J. Tom Morgan, the DA of that time in DeKalb County, a white male Democrat, did not like the new state law. And so he made a policy in his office. He said, every 17-year-old kid that comes through this office will get the opportunity of a first offender act. He was powerless to change the law, but he could enact a policy. I benefited from that. It required that I either go back to school or get a job. It required that I finish volunteer time. It required that I have a mentor. And today, I'm a felony-free Black man because of an intervention that took place when I was 17, still a juvenile. So when you protect children in their most immature action, you never know what that protection will leverage, not only for that person's future, but I get to be a father to my daughter, who's a junior in college today. I get to give back to my community. I get to work and pay taxes. It becomes the best outcome, not only for the individual, but also for the community. So that's why these stories should be important to everybody.